There are seasons in life when everything seems heavier than it should. Not because the problem is always bigger, but because inside, you are already tired before the day even begins. A small setback feels enormous. A disappointment feels final. A loss shakes not only the present, but the entire emotional structure you've spent years trying to keep standing. And maybe the hardest part about difficult times is not only the pain itself, maybe it is the feeling that you are losing your center. As if life, little by little, were pushing you away from yourself. You try to stay strong, try to keep moving, try to look balanced, but inside there is a constant noise, a silent exhaustion, a struggle not to completely fall apart. And this is where many people get confused, because they imagine that overcoming hard times means suffering less, feeling less, hardening more. But Stoicism was never about hardening the soul. It was about strengthening it. It was about learning how to move through chaos without handing chaos the government of your own mind. And today I want to walk with you through 7 Stoic lessons that can change the way you look at pain, difficulty, loss, uncertainty, and even your own growth. Because there is one detail in all of this that very few people truly notice. Hard times do not only reveal what is happening to you, they reveal who is happening within you. And if this topic connects with something real you are living right now, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which of these lessons speaks most to your current season. Because sometimes healing begins when we find the right idea at the right moment and realize that we are not alone in the battle we are fighting within. The first lesson is perhaps one of the hardest to accept, but also one of the most liberating. Not everything that happens to you is under your control, but the way you position yourself in front of it still belongs to you. This is one of those simple truths that, when it truly enters your awareness, changes the entire structure of your inner life. Because a great part of human suffering does not come only from the pain of the event. It comes from the war we wage against the fact that it happened. The person suffers for what was lost, but also suffers for not accepting that it was lost. Suffers because life changed, but also because they insist that life should not have changed. Suffers from disappointment, but also from the revolt of not being able to make the world become what it was before. And that is where suffering multiplies. Because one thing is the real wound. Another thing is the mental resistance that turns it into a prison. The Stoics deeply understood that peace only begins to reappear when you stop demanding from reality what it can no longer give you. This is not weak resignation. It is not giving up. It is lucidity. It is realizing that insisting on controlling the uncontrollable only deepens the exhaustion. Maybe today there is something in your life that you are still trying to force inwardly, an answer that never came. A recognition that never came, an ending that never happened, a person who is not what you expected, a season that did not return, a loss you still have not been able to receive. And while your mind fights to change what already happened, or guarantee what does not depend only on you, your energy keeps being drained. There is immense freedom when you understand that acceptance is not agreement with everything. Acceptance is stopping the waste of strength in trying to deny what is real. And only when you accept what is real can you begin to act clearly within it. Marcus Aurelius carried on his shoulders responsibilities that would crush most people. And even so, he kept reminding himself that the problem was not in the external events, but in the judgment he made about them. That does not erase the pain, but it returns power to the right place. Because when you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And begin asking, who do I choose to be within this? Something changes. The hard time remains hard, but you stop being only someone who is suffering and begin becoming someone who is taking a stand. The second lesson is this: do not turn difficulty into identity. This happens more often than it seems. A person goes through a bad season and, without realizing it, begins to define themselves by it. Instead of saying, I am going through a difficult moment, they begin to feel, my life is this. Instead of thinking, I am wounded, they conclude, I am broken. Instead of recognizing, I am confused, they assume I am incapable. And that silent shift in inner language completely changes the way the soul carries the weight of its own journey. Because pain carried as an experience can teach, but pain absorbed as identity begins to corrode from within. There are people who went through failures, rejections, losses, injustices, humiliations, and little by little allowed all of that to become the definition of who they are. And then the difficult season stops being a chapter and becomes a distorted mirror. The person no longer sees themselves clearly. They only see themselves through the lens of what they suffered. And this is where Stoicism offers tremendous strength. It reminds us that what happens to us does not have the automatic right to define who we are. What defines us more deeply is the way we respond, the character we preserve, the awareness we cultivate, the dignity we maintain even when life seems to press us from every side. Maybe you have lived through things that hurt deeply. Maybe you carry marks no one sees. Maybe you have days when even taking a deep breath feels difficult. But even so, There is a difference between carrying pain and becoming that pain. Pain may visit your life without occupying forever the throne of your identity. And maybe that is one of the most important acts of inner strength, saying to yourself, with calm and firmness, that what happened wounded me, but it will not define the totality of who I am. That does not erase the past, but it prevents the past from colonizing your future, and difficult times often try to do exactly that. Convince you that your most wounded part is your essence? It is not. Your essence also includes lucidity, endurance, the ability to rebuild, discernment, depth, presence, faith, learning. It is just that all of this becomes hidden when you get used to looking at yourself only through the lens of suffering. There is one detail here that many people realize too late. When you stop identifying so much with your wound, you finally begin creating space to heal it. The third lesson is one of the most transformative. Difficulty can become a school of character if you stop treating it only as an interruption of life. This idea is uncomfortable because no one likes to suffer. No one wants to look at a hard moment and immediately think about growth. And it would be superficial to romanticize pain. Not all suffering is beautiful. Not every loss comes wrapped in poetry. Not every difficult season feels noble while you are living through it. But even so, there is an uncomfortable and powerful truth. There are parts of you that only appear when life applies pressure. There is strength that only reveals itself under strain. There is lucidity that is born only after certain illusions collapse. There is maturity that does not arrive during the comfortable phase. Easy times reveal preferences. Hard times reveal structure. And that is why so many people, looking back, realize that what broke them for a time was also what repositioned them most deeply within. Not because the pain itself was good, but because it forced consciousness to mature. It forced the person to review dependencies, expectations, vanities, fears, illusions, and old ways of seeing life. The Stoics did not seek suffering, but they knew how to recognize it as training ground when it arrived. They knew that adversity has the strange power to reveal what in us was truly solid and what was only appearance. How many times has a difficult season shown you that you were placing too much expectation on people who could not sustain what they promised? How many times has a loss forced you to reconsider what truly mattered? How many times has a frustration caused a fantasy to collapse? One that had been keeping you trapped. This is where many people get confused. They want growth without being confronted. They want depth without being shaken. They want strength without facing any real demand from life. But strength without testing is only a comfortable idea. Character without friction is only a beautiful intention. Difficulty, when lived through consciously, refines. It strips away excess. It dismantles illusions. It exposes dependencies. It forces an encounter with parts of yourself that were being avoided. And if you are attentive, you can come out of it not only more tired, but more true. Maybe not lighter right away, but more lucid. Maybe not with every answer, but with less self-deception. And that is worth a great deal. The fourth lesson is this. You do not need to understand everything now in order to keep walking with dignity. In hard chimis, the mind enters into an obsessive search for immediate meaning. It wants fast answers, closed explanations, final conclusions. It wants to know why that happened, how long it will last, what comes next, what lesson it is supposed to take from it, when things will get better. And when those answers do not arrive, anxiety grows. But the truth is that not every season of life can be understood while it is being lived. There are crossings that only reveal their meaning later. There are pains that first need to be endured, not explained. There are pages that only make sense once the chapter is already passed. And one of the great sources of anguish is precisely this attempt to force clarity out of a season that is still unfolding. The Stoics understood that serenity does not depend on knowing everything. It depends on knowing how to remain standing while everything is still unclear. That is inner maturity. It is being able to bear incompleteness without collapsing entirely. Maybe today, you are trying to understand a loss, a change, a distance, a failure, a delay that still cannot be explained with precision. And your mind wants to solve it all by thinking, as if thinking more could guarantee peace faster. But it does not always work that way. Sometimes, overthinking only deepens the labyrinth. There is a very quiet strength in admitting, I do not yet fully understand what this means, but even so, I choose to move through this season with as much dignity as I can. That posture changes everything because it removes you from the obsession with a total answer and returns you to responsibility for the next step. And in hard moments, the next step matters more than grand theories. The next step is getting up today. It is not abandoning yourself today. It is caring for your mind in the smallest way today. It is not worsening what already hurts with unnecessary desperation. It is continuing to be honest, whole, lucid, even without understanding the entire picture. There is something deeply stoic in that. The courage to keep going with discipline, where full understanding has not yet arrived. And maybe you need to hear this clearly right now. Not every confusion is a sign of failure. Sometimes it is simply the shape of a season that is still reorganizing itself within. The fifth lesson is one of those that saves the soul from continuous exhaustion. Protect your inner world from unnecessary amplification. Hard times already carry enough weight. The problem is that many people, without realizing it, help that weight grow inside themselves. They take one painful fact and feed it with catastrophic imagination, cruel comparison, absolute interpretations, old memories, and dark anticipation. What was a real problem becomes a total storm, and then the person suffers not only because of what happened, they suffer because of everything their mind built around it. Seneca already understood this centuries ago when he said that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and perhaps one of the greatest disciplines in hard times is precisely not to cooperate with the expansion of suffering. That does not mean denying pain, minimizing the problem, or pretending an artificial optimism. It simply means not handing your mind the right to turn everything into personal catastrophe. How many times have you suffered more because of what you imagined than because of what truly happened? How many nights have you lost trying to predict scenarios that never arrived? How many times has a fear grown simply because your mind kept feeding it? There is a huge difference between feeling pain and building a mental empire around it, and that is where stoicism enters as a concrete practice. It teaches you to return to the fact. What truly happened? What is reality? And what is projection? What is actually in front of me? And what is my anxiety adding to it? These questions have power. They do not solve everything, but they reduce the fog. Because hard times already leave us more vulnerable to inner exaggeration, the body grows tired. The mind loses sharpness. Sensitivity increases. And in that state, automatic interpretation tends to make everything worse. That is why protecting the inner world becomes a form of resistance. Choosing what you consume, what you repeat to yourself, what kind of narrative you are strengthening. All of this matters even more. There are seasons in which too much information confuses. There are seasons in which comparison destroys. There are seasons in which overexposure to negative voices deepens the abyss. Guarding the mind is not weakness. It is spiritual and emotional strategy, because a soul that is already wounded needs less noise and more presence, less dramatization and more sobriety, less interpretive desperation and more clarity. And when you learn not to unnecessarily amplify what is already difficult, you begin to perceive that there is inevitable suffering and cultivated suffering. That distinction is worth gold. The sixth lesson is this. Real growth often looks like loss before it looks like evolution. This may be one of the hardest truths to accept when life dismantles us, because we like to imagine growth as something inspiring, beautiful, upward moving, almost always accompanied by a sense of progress. But in practice, growing often hurts. Growing dismantles. Growing requires letting an old version of yourself die. It demands that you review certainties. It demands that you release emotional dependencies, comfortable illusions, fragile identity, repeated patterns that look like protection but were actually prison. And when this begins to happen, the first feeling is rarely, I am evolving. The feeling is usually, I am losing something. And in fact, you are. You are losing old innocence. You are losing the fantasy of total control. You are losing the need for everything to happen the way you imagined. You are perhaps losing the image you had of certain people, certain paths, even of yourself. But losing does not always mean becoming worse. Sometimes it means opening space for a more truthful way of living. Stoicism teaches us not to idolize comfort, because not everything that comforts and not everything that hurts destroys. There are pains that remove excess. There are pains that break the rigidity of the ego. There are pains that dismantle an inner theater that could no longer continue. Maybe today you are living through a season in which many things seem to be collapsing. Certainties, relationships, plans, confidence, security. And the question that arises is inevitable. How can this make me grow if it only seems to leave me more tired? Perhaps the answer is this. Deep growth does not always begin with expansion. Sometimes it begins with purification. First, life takes away. First life reveals what was unstable. First life shows where you built your peace on fragile foundations. And only later, much later, sometimes does something more solid begin to be born. That does not mean every loss is good. It only means that not every loss is empty. Some losses open space for the construction of a self that is less dependent on the external, less illusioned, more stable, more aligned with reality and with what is essential. And when you understand that, suffering does not disappear, but it stops being automatically interpreted as the end. Sometimes it is transition. Sometimes it is purification. Sometimes it is life removing from you what could not continue into your next version. The seventh lesson is the one that sustains all the others. Keep cultivating virtue even when life is being unfair to you. This is the highest part of stoicism and perhaps the rarest as well, because it is relatively easy to be good, patient, balanced, and dignified when everything is flowing well. The real challenge appears when life frustrates, when people fail, when the return does not come, when pain feels unfair, when recognition is missing, when you are too tired to keep offering the best of yourself. In those moments, a silent temptation appears to harden in the wrong way, not in a strong way, but in a bitter way, to begin acting beneath your own values because you were hurt, to begin speaking harshly because you were disappointed, to begin losing nobility because the world was not noble with you. And this is where the Stoic teaching touches a very deep level of the soul. Do not let the cruelty of the world convince you to abandon the quality of your character, not because you will always be immediately rewarded for it, but because your character is one of the few things that can still remain fully yours in difficult times. When everything seems out of place, when almost nothing obeys your will, there still remains the way you choose to think, act, respond, treat others, treat yourself, sustain your principles. That is living virtue. That is moral strength. That is what prevents pain from deforming you. Maybe the world has been hard on you. Maybe you have been misunderstood, mistreated, poorly rewarded. Maybe you are tired of having to be strong. But even so, there is a silent and magnificent choice available. Not allowing what hits you to destroy what is best within you. That does not mean passivity. It does not mean accepting abuse. It does not mean failing to set boundaries. It simply means not sacrificing your conscience, your dignity, and your wholeness on the altar of resentment. Because many people go through hard times and, in the process, lose precisely what they most needed to preserve their own soul. And no external victory can compensate for that. Continuing to be honest in the middle of chaos. Continuing to be just in the middle of injustice. Continuing to be disciplined in the middle of disorder. Continuing to be human in the middle of the world's coldness. All of this is a very high form of evil. It is proof that pain did not have the last word. And when you bring these 7 lessons together, you begin to realize something very important. Overcoming hard times does not mean coming out of them without scars. It means coming out of them with more truth, with more structure, with less illusion about life, but also with less illusion about your own fragility. Because hard times do not only show where you break, they also show where you endure, where you mature, where you need to rethink your way of living, and where your soul can still expand. There are people who move through suffering, only accumulating resentment, and there are people who, without romanticizing pain, manage to transform it into clarity. The difference is not always in the size of the difficulty. Many times, it is in the way consciousness chooses to inhabit it. Stoicism does not promise a life without loss, without pain, without disappointment, without chaos. It offers something more real and more valuable. The possibility of remaining whole, even when life becomes fragile on the outside. The possibility of suffering without completely losing yourself. The possibility of falling without turning the fall into identity. The possibility of growing not only despite difficulty, but also through it. Maybe right now you're in one of those periods when everything seems to demand more than you feel you have to give. Maybe you are tired, confused, disappointed, waiting for a relief that is taking too long. Maybe you are fighting a battle almost no one knows about. And if that is your case, I want you to remember something very simple, but very powerful. You do not need to solve your whole life today. You do not need to understand everything today. You do not need to prove anything to anyone today. You only need not to abandon yourself. You only need to keep cultivating, even quietly, what keeps your soul standing. A little more lucidity, a little more acceptance of what is real, a little more watchfulness over your own mind, a little more dignity in your responses, a little more patience with the process, a little more loyalty to the kind of person you still want to be, because that is how true crossings happen, not through heroic gestures all the time, but through small inner repositionings that, repeated with awareness, change the destiny of an entire life. There is one final detail that few people notice when they talk about growth. To evolve is not to become invulnerable. It is not to stop ever feeling fear, pain, exhaustion, sadness, or confusion. To evolve is to feel all of that without being completely governed by it. It is to have wounds and still not live collapsed before them. It is to have bad days without turning them into a final conclusion about the worth of your life. It is to cross the storm without handing the storm the right to define who you are. And maybe that is Stoicism's greatest contribution in hard times. It does not ask you for perfection. It asks you for presence. It does not ask you for coldness. It asks you for structure. It does not ask you for a life without tears. It asks you for a soul that, even while crying sometimes, does not forget its own dignity. So, if you are living through a difficult season, hold this within you. Not everything is under your control, but your posture still matters. Your pain is not your identity. Difficulty can refine you. not only wound you, you do not need to understand everything now in order to keep walking with honor. Your mind needs protection against unnecessary exaggeration. Not every loss is an ending. Some are disguised beginnings. And above all, do not let the hardness of life extinguish the nobility of your character. Because in the end, that is what separates those who merely survive from those who truly evolve. And when a person understands this for real, something begins to change within. The suffering may not disappear immediately. The problems may not vanish all at once, but a center is born, a firmness is born. A kind of peace is born that does not depend on ease, but on depth. And when that peace is born, even in silence, you realize that hard times did not come only to test you. They also came to reveal the strength that only appears when life forces you to find it.